Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. That's the voice there of Black Stallion asking for piece of the action. This morning, we're talking about the importance of investing in the cultural industry. To do so, I want to welcome music analyst Mr. Nigel Campbell and researcher/consultant in the creative industries, Dr. Joanne Tull. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning,
Good morning.
Rockers.
Morning.
How are we doing this morning?
Quite good.
Yeah?
Surviving.
Surviving. I love that. Surviving is a great place to start. So, over the years, I've been witnessing, Dr. Tull, I was fortunate enough to sit in your classes many, many times.
Yes.
And Mr. Campbell, you've been commenting very publicly when it comes to the creative industries and the government investment into it. I often see you commenting on how many words
yeah.
the Minister of Finance chooses
It was a trend. It was a trend going back about 6 years. The numbers were going down, and
Do you think that the government invests enough in the cultural industry?
not at all. Not at all. I mean, one of the things that is, I kind of focus on the music industry. And there's kind of a strategic plan for the industry that the government has always been looking at. And they created a strategic plan for the music industry, and we actually was able to see some of the numbers. And the numbers that they were asking for in terms of investment is about 3 or 4 times what the development budget that we annually get, the Music TT annually gets for the music industry. And certainly in terms of what is possible for the music industry, certainly post-pandemic, the numbers have to go up, but I'm also aware we don't have enough money, not enough gas, not enough foreign exchange, not enough tax collection, and so on and so on and so on. So it's a kind of catch-22 kind of thing.
And Dr. Tull, from where you sit, has there been enough investment?
Certainly not. I mean, when one takes into consideration what Nigel has just mentioned, and that's a very important and useful context to start this discussion. It's an inability, and in some instances, an unwillingness at times. And it has much to do with whatever may be the trend or the focus of the day. And I mean, to be fair to any governance structures, there needs to be prioritization. However, the reality is also clear that the cultural industries and the arts and culture have done a tremendous amount for a lot of nations around the world, particularly developing a country context such as ours. And so I suppose it begs the question as to why is it that prioritization is not given on a consistent basis. That's one. I suppose also if one says, well, what do? I don't really have that money to give. I wish I had it to give. There are other ways in which this investment can be done. It isn't only fiscal support. But more certainly, there are other soft ways of doing it in terms of encouraging other realms of governance to make that penetration. So starting with your education, amping up efforts in the community to encourage community development, to lean towards culture where that is useful.
Right.
And we have had these iterations.
Well, this is what I'm
before.
saying. I was not going to ask because I know that we have, for example, under the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, we have that whole festivals department that deals with Best Village and things of that nature. We have My DNS now investing in the youth when it comes to things like Amplify, and of course they did the whole Youth on Stage program when it comes to that stuff. So I know you mentioned Music TT, Nigel, but for me, Music TT falls under the Ministry of Trade, right?
Ministry of
Yes,
Trade, and they've
and
now
that's
been
important.
amalgamated into this new company, TIPA.
Right, so that doesn't even factor in the numbers that we're talking about when we talk about investment into the cultural industry from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts.
What I did see was there was a figure in the last budget that suggested that it was over $70 million were invested in the cultural industries from all ministries, as
Right.
opposed to just Ministry of Trade or Ministry of Culture.
Right.
And it could be in all those areas you talk about, education and that kind of stuff. So it's not less. It's not like the Music TT got $70 million.
Right.
Their development budget was $500,000, right? And as I said, that number has been going down. Under the last government, back before 2015, it was at least $6 million and more.
Now, you mentioned that number's been going down, right? I was looking at some of the figures in terms of the percentage that's allocated to the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts in comparison to the national budget, and that figure has actually been going up from what I see. So back into 2018, it would have been 0.07% of the national budget went to culture, and in 2024, it was allocated at 0.53%.
And this is tourism and culture.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Because you have to separate
this
that.
is it.
You have to do a
Right.
separation exercise.
So
Yeah.
I was about to say that one of the tricky things here is the need to discern, to distill, because in the first instance, we discussed culture in relation to community development,
Right.
Where it
which is
was
a very
before.
important
And education.
aspect, and education. That is one strand, and it's a very important basket because that is what can give you the platform to pivot. The context in which Nigel is speaking is the pivoting that started to occur when aspects of the arts were placed under trade. That's very important because it meant now that you are having a different kind of direction. You are seeing these things as commodities that have the opportunity and potential and strength, viability even, to go across borders and make a difference for your country, its people, and your sustainability. There's that. Inside of here, we haven't even touched on the intellectual property component linked to digitalization, which would give
broadcast.
the leaps and bounds of opportunities, and we have to admit that that is where we lag tremendously. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to get your broadband to do what it needs to, far less to even contemplate getting into digital economy kinds of activities that link back to the arts and culture. And then I suppose it's also about the fact that we don't see the need to consistently evaluate these things so that we would know where we're going and if we're going in the right direction.
Right. And let me pause you there, Dr. Tubb, because I want to get back to the evaluation in a little while. Just now, you would have mentioned that we mentioned community development, we mentioned education, and we talk in the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts. Now, back in 2020, the government saw it fit to put these ministries together because they thought, same way that we linked community development with the idea of culture, it's also one of the things is linking tourism with culture because they saw that it was a partnership that could yield fruit.
Yes.
Well, firstly, let me ask how you feel about that collaboration because we mentioned community development, we mentioned education, we mentioned trade. But we didn't mention tourism as a factor when it relates to culture.
I think one of the things, if you don't mind to stop.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that the government has been looking at is the idea of carnival as being our biggest magnet, certainly here in Trinidad. And out of carnival, we know music has been created. Steel band, calypso, soca music has been created. Chutney, out of carnival. And so therefore, the idea of the arts and tourism becomes a natural fit for those who think in terms of the policymakers now. Way back before probably some of you all were born, Derek Walcott famous line about tourism being, but the arts being an adjunct of tourism. He was against that whole thing because he saw the arts as a definite business, as I do.
But so is tourism, though.
Yes,
Indeed.
right. But I could see them as separate entities,
Right.
Whether you do operating locally, and of course the government's focus has always been on has been on export and job creation, right? So there's nothing. I'm not against that, but just the simple linking of those two and discounting the other possibilities, I think that becomes a problem for me in terms of the linkages.
Well, excuse me, if I may say, I think the linkages, yes, you're correct, but I see it as a staged thing, even though I never really like the idea of stage, especially in the context of development. So I suppose I want to say that I see all of these elements as things that can go along a progressive continuum. So the community development, education, and what have you, as I've mentioned before, is a platform. Somewhere inside of there, of course, we saw ourselves evolving into a recognition that this could be linked to trade and that this is something that needs to be captured in a particular way. And I suspect that had a lot to do with the kind of work that Dr. Nurse and myself and others were doing. So there is that. But we also did a lot of work on festival tourism.
Right.
And I think that is actually one of the conduits through which we have been able to link that music and all these other key elements to trade. One other thing I would say is that if you don't have a lot to give, then you got to choose. And over the years, we have seen policy direction shift in terms of what would be important, what gets and what does not. So music always gets. And then you have the performing arts that dwindle somewhere in there. Fashion does get, film gets. But then, of course, there's always this weird conversation about carnival. Where does this fall? There's always this feeling that because aspects of the private sector do well within the carnivalesque, within the carnival industry, that carnival does not need that support. A carnival is just going to do it on its own. And I think there's a fallacy there simply because Carnival links to some of these other sectors. And all of these sectors really do need, at this stage, to my mind, some kind of strategy that would allow them to pivot. I think we've passed development now, because they have been developing, as you all say, in spite of, for spite of.
Now, you mentioned the carnival, and I just wanted to put in, I'm going back to the figures again now. I went to the Ministry of Finance website to make sure I get the figures right, because I don't want nobody to see a lying on them. All right? And according to the estimates of recurrent expenditure, this is number 6, current transfers to statutory boards and similar bodies, under which the NCC falls, and Pantran-Bago would fall, and a whole bunch of other state boards and bodies. $179 million plus, right? 100, a little bit over $179 million. So that is an investment into Carnival.
Prizes, infrastructure.
Isn't that not Carnival investment?
It is investment, but
And there's
I
an
think that
economic
we could,
impact that
yes,
Dr. Tel could
but
tell you
I
about.
think we could run a leaner shop. And without getting too much into that, because, you know, anyone listening could say, but she don't work there and she don't know. These things do cost money, and the fact of the matter is, at times we perhaps have to think about how we can run a leaner shop, that we can get more bang for our buck. It's also that if you stick with that, it means that you would never see the importance of using money, because you're talking about money. As I said before, investment isn't only fiscal.
But we're talking budget.
How money? Yes, but then one also has to think about where else it can spread, which is the point I really want to make. And the where else has to do with creating policies that would make the sectors more robust. And creating and implementing a policy costs money too. You see, it's not a 5-cent thing. So
Where do we stand now with the cultural policy?
I don't know.
Well, the white paper was laid at the end of the last, was that 2020, was the last time? Yeah, Dr. Nanda Gatsby Dolly did lay it as white paper. I spoke to some people in the Ministry of Culture, and they said, well, it's now the policy. It wasn't a big announcement. They said, now it's the policy. I'm unclear, green paper, white paper.
But what would you
But it
think?
has not been implemented, and the implementation is a whole committee thing. And that has been a sticking point at the ministry.
So I don't want to play devil's advocate or be the wet blanket, but that is cultural policy. What about cultural industries policy?
Boy, there you
the
go.
two are different. What about the policy that would specifically guide the same festival tourism? What about the policy that would help us to really engineer that trade in cultural goods and services? And these things that we are talking about, I think it's important to note, are not only challenges within this local context. This is a regional issue, and I suppose it beckons the question as to the extent to which our regional governance structures have helped our national governance structures to do what they will, the way the arts and culture are concerned.
I also wonder whether or not it's high enough on the totem pole
Well,
for
priority.
consideration.
Well,
If
priority.
it's a priority, if it is that high in the priority.
All right, so this is where I want to get back to evaluation now. How do we assess the impact that, whether it be the direct spend or the indirect spend, where we spread it out and we get a little piece from education, a little piece from youth development, a little piece from national security, a little piece from here, there, and everywhere. How do we assess the impact it has on the orange economy?
Okay,
Data, but
well,
that's the expert.
well, I suppose in a utopic world, it would be the kind of assessment that would allow for a multiplier effect kind of work. And there are some economists that would argue, we have economists in Trinidad and Tobago would tell you that you can't measure the arts and culture. Yes, in this day and age, it's very strange to me because it's been done all over the world. And that work would be very important because that is what would lead then to the arts and culture being identified within satellite accounting frameworks. That is one of the reasons why it's not counted formally. To say that you can say with a central bank stamp that this is what it contributes to GDP. So there is that. But let's say you don't have all that money to do that and do that, to say you just don't have it right now to get into that, because that's a long road. Even though it's quite important.
I was now going to say, when in discussions with Dr. Burke, she would have mentioned that in an attempt to be able to qualify and quantify what sort of input or income is generated from just Carnival alone, it's difficult because people who sell in water this side of the road might give you the actual income that they make.
So yes, it is difficult, and I suppose those within other contexts would have said the same, but one can start, and we have certainly done the work. that gives indication. I mean, if you know that something is going to give you X amount of dollars and you have been able to work that out using some kind of frameworks, it's important also to know that there are different kinds of frameworks. So what I just mentioned there is if you want your first class, your a la carte. But most certainly one can also do input-output analysis, which is what people have done a lot. There's also the one, especially if it's tied to festival tourism, where you do the assessments to literally quantify what has been invested in terms of the expenditure you've just mentioned, and to identify key elements, because you're doing a study, you're trying to gauge, and you can use your gauge to determine where you can go, and perhaps in using the gauge as well, it might help you to make a very serious, sober decision as to where I can put the money, and of course the studies would back you up. Because the data will be there to show that this is perhaps my best bang for my buck.
Right, and that's great in theory, right? So when we do these studies and we have the theory and we have the data, we can say, all right, great. So if I put my money here, it should do this.
Well, Jerome, let me just pause to say
that. It doesn't work like that.
Let me just pause to say that data is not theory.
No, it doesn't
when
work like that.
When you count something that is real.
Right, no, but what I mean is
we have
but hear me out, right? Hear me out. In terms of, all right, so yes, if I put this here, it should do this based on the information that I have, based on the data that I have.
No, that's
it should
not how
do this.
it works.
I mean for future investment, right?
That is not how
but
it
how
works.
do we ensure that the trickle down happens from the policy point down to the man on the ground?
That is out of our pay grade. That is out of our purview, because
I think
choice has to
one of the
do
things
with,
that we've observed over time is that the stakeholders themselves are not even willing to give information, a lack of trust and that kind of stuff, right? So that you may have these kind of policy promises. The Ministry of Tourism in the last budget spoke about creating festivals. There was a whole season.
Festival of Fets.
Festival of Fets and a kind of post-jazz festival season and a food and rum and that kind of stuff, right? And I mean, it's all pie in the sky as far as I'm concerned, because you're not even quantifying what has been the impact of those festivals. Because I can tell you from the inside, being a person at a festival development has dropped. Festivals, a lot of the independent festivals, we've seen the headlines abroad in England and Europe and that kind of stuff. It's also reflected regionally, and certainly here in Trinidad and Tobago. A couple of festivals of these larger outdoor jazz festivals are gone, right? We have some other smaller events, and they have these other ones that are all subsidized. Yes, they have the multiplier effect that somebody's doing the catering, somebody's doing the stage management. But in terms of developing the artists, you have the same cast. So after a while, you're operating within a narrow silo, so that the kind of wider development and hope for development is not happening there. And as I said earlier, the thing that always bothers me is the actual willfulness of artists to refuse to give information and to give data for whatever reason. I guess it may be tied into not wanting to pay taxes or something. So,
I don't know. Once I accept and I agree with Nigel to a point, that being the case, I do feel as though I have not had that challenge.
Right.
And I also feel that the data can only do what you want it to do. And I know some people will probably have a conspiracy theory and say, oh, well, they probably cook the books. And no, it's not that. What I mean by that is that having received the numbers and seeing what it tells you is significant or not, because it's also that, then institutions, because it's not only government, institutions, whoever are the stakeholders involved with the arts and culture, can make critical decisions then as to how they want to go forward, that they can take advantage of what the numbers are showing them, where it is positive, and of course, where it's negative, what can I do? And that is where other stakeholders may come in to play.
Yeah.
So they're the data machinery, but the policymakers as well. So it's not really theory. I mean, these things are done. This is how other parts of the world and even in the Caribbean.
But what I'm hearing
this is what is done.
What I'm hearing is that there has to be almost like a radical mind shift in terms of how we operate and how we develop.
Culture shift that has
the cultural shift in terms of how we accept data, how we think about data, how we think about the cultural industries and the creative industries, and that hasn't happened as yet.
I would
from the
agree with
bottom
that.
all the way to the top.
I would agree
and I
with
think that is something that has to happen. How that happens in an island like ours with an election next year, God alone knows, but something has to happen sooner rather than later.
All right, guys. So we only have just about a minute left. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds each, and I really want to hear, in closing this morning, what do you hope to hear in the budget on Monday when it comes to the cultural industries?
I want some kind of strategic idea. It will come from the minister, but some kind of increase in budget so there could be some kind of strategic planning for the development of creative industries going forward. As it stands, it's kind of ad hoc right now.
I think I agree with Nigel. That would make more sense. I mean, because you're talking about an intervention that isn't necessarily going to cost you a whole lot. It's really about a mindset, a will to make that change and that impact.
Plus some money.
Plus some money. Well, let me say thank you both for joining us this morning and for sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to the budget on Monday and see if your wishes will come true.
And the number of words.
And you know, you're going to count the number of words again. I'm looking forward to see the count. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joanne Tull and Mr. Nigel Campbell joining us this morning to chat a bit about the orange economy and what we hope for in budget 2025. We take a quick break and come back with more on the Now Morning Show. Stick around.